Okay, thank you everyone for joining me for this lovely discussion about Shady Grove Cemetery and the forthcoming book. I am Marybeth Niederkorn, Director of the Cape Girardeau County Archives Center and member of the Genealogical Society. All right, so this evening I'm wanting to talk a little bit about the cemetery's history and the settlement that was loosely in the Allenville, Dutchtown, southern Cape Girardeau County area. Recent developments, and then, of course, the upcoming book that is underway right now and should be ready by June. Okay, so just to give a little background on how this project all came together. In 1998, Sharon Sanders and Diana Craig Steele, Sharon is the librarian at the Southeast Missourian newspaper and also a Genealogical Society member, and Diana passed away a number of years ago, but she and Sharon collaborated on several books, and in 1998 they released the book about Shady Grove, the cemetery and the school, and it was very detailed and interesting, considering that there had been basically nothing written about Shady Grove up to that point that I was aware of. And then almost 20 years went by, and I became friends with Sharon, working at the newspaper, and began reporting on the cemetery for the Southeast Missourian newspaper. Then, a couple years later, I came to work here, and in 2020, began working with researchers who were trying to put together as much information as they could about the cemetery. And then, earlier this year, in February actually, I began an updated and revised edition of the Shady Grove book. Because we've been selling it through the Genealogical Society in paperback form, photocopied, but they are planning a big family reunion, the Shady Grove folks, this summer, and they asked me for about 200 copies, and I said, that might be a little out of our reach, so let's rethink this. So, okay, moving on. All right, so we have Shady Grove as the cultural center. So, it's an African-American cemetery, founded 1891 officially, but was probably used as a cemetery, burial place, and gathering place before that. The first photo we have here is circa 2014. That is Louise Cardwell Duncan, who is descended from several people who were buried at Shady Grove, and Elroy Kinder, who was a local historian, and both of them have passed away since. But in this picture, they were planning cemetery cleanup efforts, which have sort of come together and sort of fallen apart as the years have gone by. And then the picture below that is a wide-angle view of Shady Grove Cemetery from 2012. Drew, I believe, was part of the effort to catalog cemeteries in the county, of which Shady Grove was one. So the modern site, it's County Road 211, 502. County Road 211 dead ends into Shady Grove Cemetery. And that is off of Highway 74, down southwest of Cape and south of Jackson. So there are about 150 marked burials that we know of, and the property was recently surveyed by the county. It's a little bit over 1 acre. Originally, it was more like 2 acres of property. There has been media attention in recent years. When I wrote the story in 2017, it was about a tree that was down over blocking the access road, and KFES TV has done a couple of stories. The Southeast Missourian has done some more stories in recent years. It's the most recent burial that was done there was, I believe, in the 1960s, 1970s. So it's been a defunct site for quite some time and has kind of fallen out of the collective memory. So media attention's been very helpful. Okay, and as I mentioned, the original deed and trustees were put to paper, recorded in the county deed book in 1891. The photograph there at the very top is the only known photograph of the building, and that's in the Shady Grove book. That obviously was taken before the building was demolished, so sometime in the 1940s, probably 1930s. And then we have a couple of example headstones here. Celia Lee and Albert and Belle Bush. Now, Belle was a Cato. That's a big family name down at Shady Grove. Albert actually is buried at Fairmount with his second wife, but he has his headstone in both places. But the school was in operation from about 1892 until the 1920s. And then the building was also used for church services and gatherings, family gatherings. They'd hold picnics and other gatherings through the times. And then there's also the military service of Wash Gibney. Now, in the original book, Sharon and Diana photocopied numerous military service record cards that detailed where Wash Gibney was stationed. He fought during the Civil War. He was in the 102nd, and Denise Lincoln actually contributed a beautifully written chapter about Wash Gibney and his service. He mustered in Michigan and lived there for a number of years apparently, and was back in Cape Girardeau when he passed away. So, you know, and Denise does a much better narrative job with it than I would have. So I have replaced those record cards with Denise's narrative, and I think it's a vast improvement. So, okay, so here we have the original survey and the deed. On the left, that is the legal description of the property, gives the metes and bounds, and exactly where it's located. And this is property that was deeded from the Sudicums. I believe it's Henry and his wife Louise, and they deeded over some property to these three trustees in 1891. And as far as I can find, there were never any successor trustees. Only one of these three trustees had a probate record on file with the county, and it said nothing about any successor trusteeship. So it's just a cemetery that has suffered from some neglect. Okay, so here is the original cover of the 1998 book, designed by a Southeast Missourian page designer. This version included the school records, military service cards from Wash Gibney, obituaries, burial records, other information. And as I mentioned before, for many years it was photocopied locally, sold as a paperback, and that has kind of become cost prohibitive. And then here is the cover for the new version that I'm working on. So I will also be including a 2002 interview between Frank Nickel and Louise Duncan. And Frank right now is working on putting together some notes on that interview, and I'm supposed to be getting that back from him any day now. So we'll see how that goes. But I have included and updated a couple of more cemetery surveys. So Sharon and Diana had put together a survey of everyone buried at Shady Grove, as well as their immediate relatives. You know, when people were born, when they died, when they got married, what their cause of death was, what their occupation was. Any information she could pull together, that's what Sharon did. And so I have also included headstone surveys that were done, the one that the Archive Center put together in 2012, and then another one that I found in this book that had other Dutchtown area cemeteries that had had headstone surveys in the 1990s. Unfortunately, the Shady Grove one doesn't have any information about who captured the information off of the stones, so I've included that with a disclaimer in the new version of the book. But let's see, as I mentioned, the chapter on Wash Gibney, which is really something because it talks about him and his brother Lewis and all kinds of historical context, which is really important and helpful for understanding exactly how important Wash's contributions were. So we also have information on the National Register of Historic Places listing. Shady Grove made the National Register in 2022. And the group of descendants who are working to preserve the cemetery hired a researcher who came down from Chicago. He worked closely with the Archive Center and with several other research sites in the area and put together a really bang-up job on that National Register nomination, which the listing is not, or the application form is not digitized and put online yet. I think they have a couple of years lag. But I have, anybody can email and request a copy of it, which I put that request in earlier today, so I'll see where that goes. A couple of years ago, we had a couple of volunteers here who indexed the 1998 version of the book, which is very helpful. And we will be indexing the new version as soon as I get everything into it, laid out, put together. And it will be published on Amazon in as many formats as I can get it into, probably 3 formats: hardcover, paperback, and ebook, with different price points for each one. So, yeah. So the cemetery surveys, as I mentioned, this is a page from the survey that I think was done in the 1990s. That's in this book here. You'll notice how there is a name here, Brassheld, which Nancy and I were just talking about this earlier today. This name shows up in so many different iterations. It's actually Brassfield, but the headstone looks like it reads Brassheld because it is a little deteriorated. So you'll see all kinds of little discrepancies like that throughout the cemetery and the censuses. And I and Nancy both have been trying to make little notes and fill in where we can find death certificates which were not online in 1998 or 2009. And so we're trying to fill in as many holes as we can, so to speak. But, and I keep harping on Wash Gibney, my goodness. But this is his headstone. It is, as far as we know, he's the only person who served in the Civil War who's buried out at Shady Grove. But
I feel like Lewis is too, but there's not a headstone for him.
Right.
I just kind of feel like he is.
Right. Well, we haven't found him anywhere else, so yeah. But yes, Wash Gibney's great-great-grandchildren are leading the effort to preserve the cemetery. So Judy Humphrey and her sister Diane Gibney Bell have both been in continual contact with me over the last several years, the last few years, trying to establish as much as we can so that we can provide as much basis for them taking over trusteeship. I'll get to that in a minute, though. So, okay, let's see. All right, so this photograph, I love this picture because when I went to Sharon Sanders and I said, "Hey, Sharon, I would really like to put together an updated version of this book," and Sharon said, "Go for it. Hey, do you want my research notes? Hey, I have a couple boxes of research notes. You want those?" And I said, sure, I'll take them. So she called me up one day and said, "Come on by the newspaper office. I got a couple boxes for you." And here they are. So I have spent quite a bit of time going through Sharon's research notes, and that was where I found that transcript of the 2002 interview between Frank Nickel and Louise Duncan. I was heartbroken because I didn't think I was going to be able to include any of Louise's actual voice in this book, because I had done an interview with her in 2017 at the newspaper, but I left all of my interview materials at the paper when I left, and they wiped the hard drive about a year after I left, so all of that's gone. Fortunately, Sharon had the transcript of the conversation between Frank and Louise, so I'll be able to at least excerpt that. But the National Register nomination, as I said, added in 2022. You can request a copy on the National Parks Service website. So the National Register nomination includes information on the Silver Lake chapter and Mount Horeb. So those were mutual aid societies, particular to the African American community, if I understand it correctly. And they ensured that people would be buried with dignity and be able to pay for some grave markers and that kind of thing. And then there's also a pretty extensive history of the school and the cemetery, as well as the Gibney family, the white Gibney family that had owned Wash when he was enslaved prior to emancipation. And Denise could talk about that forever. You'll just have to read the book. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about the Elroy Kinder collection. So when I called Carla Jordan and I said to Carla, hey, I'm working on this updated book about Shady Grove Cemetery, and I understand that you all have some artifacts over there, Carla said, come on by, photograph them, include them in the book if you want. And I said, I would love to. So this is just a tiny sample of what I went over and photographed just a couple of weeks ago. There on the left is the mailbox from the school building, and on the right is the door of the school building. And I've been told that Elroy Kinder, Frank Nickel, Louise Duncan, and several other people were involved in the cleanup effort. When the building was demolished, there was a trash heap, and several items were thrown onto it. And Elroy and company pulled things out of that heap, and that is how we have some of these artifacts. So, Elroy's generous donation before he passed away means that we are able to have actual tangible things that were part of the school and community. So I am calling these stanchions because these were called stanchions in the History Center collection, but they are very heavy, somewhere between, I would say, 40 and 50 pounds each. They're about 3.5 feet tall. They look to me like they were stakes driven into the ground, probably across the old entryway, or maybe as a hitching post, I don't know. But they were found buried sort of near the entrance. And if anyone has any thoughts, I would be thrilled to hear them. But so far I'm just calling them stanchions of uncertain origin in the book. So, okay, and as promised, here we go. We're talking about the Shady Grove Heritage and Preservation Organization, and there is their website. So, they are direct descendants of people buried at Shady Grove. Everyone on the board is a direct descendant, including the sisters I mentioned earlier, Judy Humphrey and Diane Gibney Bell, who are just absolutely lovely, and they are very determined that their family history and African American history in Cape Girardeau County be preserved and move forward in perpetuity and dignity. And the Archive Center has worked very closely with them since 2021. Judy first got in touch with us around that time because she wanted to see all the pictures we had of Shady Grove Cemetery, and we have about, of the pictures we have, only about 2/3 of them have actual headstones. The rest are just pictures of the flags, the little landscape flags that mark burials, or railroad tie pieces, or rebar pieces, or concrete, or stones, or other markers that don't have any actual information. And we sent Judy what we had, and that just became a back and forth with her, and she has been an absolute delight to work with. And they get results. They got the cemetery on the National Register, which is a pretty robust process. For anybody who's been through that, you know. And they are petitioning for trusteeship of Shady Grove, because there just hasn't been a trustee since the last of the trustees died. We're not exactly sure when that is, because one of the trustees, we can't find a death certificate for him. But we're pretty sure he passed away, because, you know, this was 1891. So, the next hearing on this is April 1st, and it's my understanding that all the judge needs to do is read the order that has been provided by the attorney for the group and make his decision one way or another. And he seemed pretty amenable to it in the hearing earlier this month. As he said, you know, there's a group of people wanting to take trusteeship of the cemetery. I see no reason why they shouldn't, and I don't see any barriers for that. So all he wanted was the order, and then he's going to make his ruling probably April 1st. Fingers crossed. And then that big reunion that I mentioned is set for this summer, for the weekend before Juneteenth. And they do this every other year, where they have descendants from all over the United States. They come and have a big celebration, and 2024 is the year to come do it again, and they're inviting everyone, Judy told me. So they're expecting hundreds of people, and they're really excited that I'm working on putting this book together, and that they're, you know, hoping for trusteeship. So we're hoping they're going to have a lot to celebrate this summer. And they're also starting a campaign for funds to clean and preserve the cemetery, which makes perfect sense to me. But anyhow, so our involvement. As I mentioned, we have several resources on the cemetery, and the History Center down the street at 102 South High Street, they have several artifacts and an exhibit that they have put together on Shady Grove in the past. And this petition for trusteeship, I provided an affidavit in support of their petition. As a county official and a local authority on the cemetery, which apparently to be a local authority on anything, you just have to sound authoritative about it. But again, that ruling is expected April 1st, so we'll see how that goes. But okay, in summary, Shady Grove Cemetery is an important neglected site which needs attention and funds to continue, or to support continued upkeep, and to properly honor those buried there. Black history in Cape Girardeau County is underrepresented, grossly underrepresented, and underreported. And this is a tremendous opportunity, I think, to shine a light and help preserve a memorial to a lost community. Thank you all very much. Any questions? Thoughts? Concerns?
Those tombstones?
Yeah.
I've seen things similar to that, you know, like around graves.
Oh, okay.
And just the rest of it walked off at some time. But also around the cemetery, that'd be, you know, a lot to go around.
It really would, because that cemetery is roughly rhomboid, where it's kind of more, it's wider at one end than the other, and it's a pretty big site. I wonder if maybe some of the rest of that set of stanchions and chains might have gotten melted down for scrap during the war effort, because, you know, it's hard to say though.
If the cemetery was plotted out at a larger size and now it's smaller, what does that actually mean? Are there burials that aren't in that acre that are in the outside place?
Yes.
And there's nothing there's nothing to be done about that, or?
That would be, it's on private land. There is a landowner who, his property adjoins that cemetery, and that would be up to the trustees of the cemetery to work out with the local landowner.
So you can go back to the original plotted size.
Right.
So how did they ever sell it? That's, I mean, how... Okay, sorry. Rabbit hole, there we go.
Yep, exactly.
If there's stones outside the allotted amount for the cemetery, they're on the other guy's property, legally by the legal description. However, they're still part of the cemetery. They're just not in the deeded part.
Okay.
People still have a right to go to those graves. It's just that cemetery, that part of the cemetery is not part of the actual deeded cemetery. Because when you look at the county and you've got 250 something plus known cemeteries in the county, probably the vast majority of those have never been officially deeded to the county trust or to a board or anything like that. They're just out there, and sometimes the deed will say, it may, give the legal description for the property and say, except
Right.
1/4 acre for the family cemetery and not give a legal for the cemetery.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the time, a lot of times, like on the newer ones, they will give a legal for the cemetery. But I mean, people still have a right to access those. But
theoretically, the state law protects them. But as it was told me many years ago by a lawyer who should know this, a landowner can claim I didn't know it was there unless they have a certified letter to them that says this cemetery is on your property. And there's been a lot of people out of burn in hell for eternity who have gone ahead and just plowed over the cemetery.
There are a number of African American cemeteries in Cape Girardeau that have been plowed over. That's just the nature of it.
I don't remember the year, but I had word from New Bern that one of her cousins, Diane Bell, was coming to town and was wanting to see Shady Grove.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it must have been 2014. It was a hot, sticky day and lots of chiggers and lots of snakes and lots of poison ivy. And I said, okay, let's go. And I did... I had already found Wash Gibney's tombstone. Everything was really grown up. It's hard to find things out there. What it was then, it hadn't been mowed for a long time. And she was just so mad and so indignant when we got there that it was so neglected. I think she thought it
This
would
takes
be
one growing season.
thought that it would be a fine, manicured, well-kept cemetery, and it wasn't. And she was like, why? I think she probably came and yanked on your... you didn't have a beard then, but I mean, she was just hot for the longest time. I said, Diane, this is your people. This is not owned by the county. It's not owned by anybody that we can identify.
Right.
And yeah, it's a shame, and it's worth crying, but take your energy and do something with it. And I would get phone calls, and she, how do you even tackle the project? But this is really a story of growth and awareness building, and how to walk through the system, and how to pull pieces from all kinds of different places. And it wasn't just Diane, it was Judy and many others that have poured themselves into this. And they're long distance away. They're in Georgia and California and many places.
Maryland. And
so they are working cross country to pull these things together. I'm just amazed what they were able to do with that indignant passion that began to boil up in them when they realized, this is our ancestors, and to honor them, we can't look to anybody else. It needs to happen from within this extended, large family, and it has grown with interest and passion and money, and wherewithal to get it done. And I was like, yay, it's not me.
Not only that, but Judy told me, because Judy was here for the hearing in March, and she sat with me here at the archive. We went through her family history for hours, and she told me that several entities have come together in a pro bono fashion and have donated tens of thousands of dollars worth of services toward getting this done. The attorney who is working on behalf of the group, he's working pro bono. He asked me to conduct a search to see if I could find any descendants who might be able to tell us if there were ever any successor trustees named. And he told me later that that service that I rendered, or that I undertook, would have cost $10,000 if he had gone through an agency that does that. And Judy said that just over and over they've been met with people who really believe in what they're doing and are willing to donate in kind. Even the Rust family, the publishers of the Southeast Missourian, when I approached John Rust, who's the publisher, and I said, John, I really want to use these obituaries from the Southeast Missourian in this book, because they're genealogical gold, and John says, I want to help. How can I support this project? So he's very generously given us an in-kind donation where he would charge a for-profit entity to use that much information, roughly $5,000. He is instead giving us an in-kind donation. So, which he didn't have to do that.
Yeah, this whole thing with the canon, we know how much one photo, the rights to one photo costs.
Yeah. Yes, but there's been just an outpouring of support and generosity for this project, and I think it's a testament to how important this is, not just to the family, but also to the vanished community and to people who are scattered all over the place who are discovering that they do have a sense of identity and a sense of place.
Let me say one thing about Louise Duncan, too. She was a rock, and a wealth of information, and would always let me sit at her side and tell me lots and lots of stories, more than I had time for sometimes, but it just one week to the other. But her interest in it, and she has ancestors there, too, but her father and her grandfather
We're
caretakers of the cemetery. So they were kind of the last touch to the cemetery to keep it intact, and when they passed, and then you know how things go with generations that get scattered, and young people that don't pay attention to the old times, and you don't do Memorial Days anymore like you used to, and things begin to just grow up and weeds and poison ivy and periwinkle. And then she was not able, but was so happy when Elroy and Frank Nickel kind of came alongside to put that little link in the 90s to her memory, and then give us a stepping stone to be where we are today.
And through the years, we've had groups of SEMO students who have done some restoration work out there. I believe there's someone who has been volunteering to mow the cemetery for the last several growing seasons. So there have been efforts, but the hope with the group of descendants is that they will be able to do something more perpetual. So, and I am thrilled to be able to help them, just in a little way.
But I've been amazed at some of the stories that you can find on some of the people buried out there. The one I worked on was just fascinating. It's a woman that was brought as a slave from Virginia, and her obituary in the Missourian actually talked about the journey a bit. Pretty interesting.
The one said something about where Bollinger was born in Bollinger County.
Yes.
Which part of Bollinger County is that?
Not off the top of my head.
Well,
But-
in the Whitewater Presbyterian Church record,
Mm-hmm.
in the session minutes,
Mm-hmm.
it mentions the black member. I can't remember all the first names, but some of them had last names that were under it, and it's slaves.
Seems like there was a former slave that was in the slave narratives.
Yes.
Well, I was gonna say, I just don't remember the Lear, but there were 3 before, and the one was, obviously, he even got to be a session member at Republic.
Yeah,
Wow.
because there were a lot of
It's
blunders.
interesting reading that, because the minister then, he went back east, and he was pretty much an abolitionist.
Interesting.
He wrote a whole lot about this, about the slavery in the 1830s, 1840s in Cape County.
You don't say.
Yeah, I got.
Yeah, I know.
Let's talk, Sheila.
The next one named Isabel, I'd really like to have
Yeah.
Yeah. You should talk to
When
Nancy.
I was doing that history thing, I started pulling out the part I was seeing about the slaves that were actually in the minute books.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, really, you might tie in.
It's harder on that.
Yeah,
We've been promising to do that.
I know, but we haven't managed it. Yeah.
Marybeth,
Yes.
I'm sure you checked the funeral home records.
Yes, the Sparks Funeral Home records, and Sparks.
Sparks, that was the African
Mm-hmm.
American.
Yes, we have copies of those, and they're pretty extensive. And between my efforts in going through those and Nancy going through the funeral home records and also through the death certificates and all kinds of other information, it's really a much more robust group of information than what Sharon and Diana were able to pull together in the 90s.
When you think about how much easier it's gotten to access some of those.
Mm-hmm. And this really is a nationwide conversation now about African American cemeteries, and there's a project, CBS News is working on a project to name everyone who was enslaved in the United States. And research work that I'm doing and that Nancy's doing and that Denise is doing, these are all things that can help support projects like that. So, thank you all for your interest.
What if the woman I did the work for is going to come? She's from Las Vegas.
Oh, right. Can't think of her name. But yes, I hope. Deborah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is she coming?
Probably. I mean,
I'd love to meet her.
the way Judy's talking.
Actually worked on 2 different lines of hers.
Oh, okay. Interesting. Yeah. But anyway. Okay.
This is in Cape Girardeau County, but Denise or somebody here might take interest in this and want to try to do something. I had a phone call a few weeks ago from St. Louis County. There's a large cemetery near airport.
Washington Cemetery.
Washington Cemetery.
Is that the one that was
up
such a scandal?
on the tax sale this year. And the county has been getting lots of inquiries from developers who want to relocate everything there. In terms of parking garage.
And the records just apparently are horrible.
Sure.
Oh my gosh.
So,
And
Yeah.
they were
trying to figure like how can they do this if there's laws to protect cemeteries and that. And they're saying, well, we can relocate it, you know, so I just figured, I don't know what to do, but,
1
you know.
square foot of dirt for each person. That's all you have to move. If you dig down and do 1 square foot of dirt, you'd move that person. Because there's nothing left at this point. But that's considered, at least in Franklin County. Our museum director was also a mortuary guy up on all the laws and stuff, and he helped move some cemeteries that had to be moved. But he goes, 1 square foot of dirt is all you have to move. And then you take and move the bottom. And of course, in those, they're not even marked. You know, the grave sites aren't even going to be marked.
Well, this is a little bit more contemporary cemetery. They've had burials there
Even really
recently, yeah, so I'm sure they're going to run into caskets and all.
Yeah.
And maybe some crypts. That's still part of the requirements in that kind of.
I lived in Rhode Island. They had a very strong state cemetery law that had taken effect at a certain point, and a lot of development had happened since it was passed. And you do things like, there was one bookstore, the Barnes Noble bookstore I went to once, and there was a historic cemetery in the parking lot with a fence around it. Oh, and they couldn't touch it. Which, yeah,
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't have to walk through the chickers and ticks to get that.
that was pretty accessible. Another one was surrounded by a sand mine.
Oh,
It's a Civil War general buried in it. General Rodman.
The cemeteries are weird things, We've been burying people a long, long time, and we're going to run out of places to bury, so what to do with all of those. When you're fighting with a land developer, that is pretty fun property. Well, 170 took a lot of it.
Right, exactly. So now we're trying to make up for it. Wow.
funny.
It was such a mess when they did that.
Right, and then the
Construction.
Metrolink too, that train track cut into that hillside too.
It seemed like that was another one where they found that whoever was operating the cemetery was doing multiple sales of the same lots and stacked burials.
Well, that happened in Fairmont Cemetery too. When you mentioned Sparks, Frank Sparks was, during the 30s.
Record keeping.
Yeah, during the 30s, the only place to bury in the city of Cape Girardeau for black burials was Section C, and he kept trying to bury. Well, it was both the pauper's land and the pauper's burial ground and the black burial ground, and he kept running into graves on graves on graves and begged the city to open another section of Fairmont, which, as I understand it, that section along Penny Street, that has kind of traditionally been another black burying ground, but a more contemporary one. That land was purchased and deeded and some of it purchased to expand burials. But in the 30s, he was running. It doesn't look like there's much in Section C at Fairmont because there's not a lot of grave markers.
Right.
But there's lots and lots of graves there.
I've gotten contacted over the last 10 years by at least 2 irate people that wondered why the society wasn't doing something about cleaning some of those cemeteries. There are 250 of them in the county, and there's not very many of us, and we're all getting older.
And they're not county cemeteries.
Right, the county does own a couple of cemeteries, just a couple.
There's quite a few that have been deeded to the county or the county commission in trust.
Right,
And basically,
right.
that just means that they're always going to be the cemetery. You can't do anything about it. There's no maintenance. But there's no
maintenance.
The
Yeah, there's no
only
requirement.
cemetery that I know of that the county has any dealings with on maintenance, and I don't understand the exact agreement and why, but Kenyon Cemetery.
Right.
They have something to do with, I don't know how they accept the responsibility of Kenyon, but
Oh, it was decades and decades ago.
there's,
Yeah.
if you go to the various county boards and look, there's, I believe, 3 trustees, and their term is until death. So they are the trustee until that or until they resign. And then I guess the county appoints a trustee to take their place. But I don't think there's any financial, anything like that. They just appoint the trustees maybe. I can't remember the exact circumstance of it.
It's not exactly in a mainline area either. It's out there.
Yeah.
I have an uncle buried there.
Because years ago, I remember people, they knew the county had some affiliation with it, and they were wanting the county to start mowing it. And guys like, well, we can't start that. We'll be taking care of
Every cemetery. Yeah.
And but there is something in the minute books about it.
Yep. Yeah. Shady Grove actually is deeded to itself. Shady Grove Cemetery, the deed to it is, the owner is listed as Shady Grove Cemetery. So, and that was something that I talked to Louise about. I was wanting to do another story before I left the newspaper in 2020, but couldn't get it to come together. It was just one thing and another. But I did talk to Louise about that shortly before she passed away, and she told me, to her knowledge, Shady Grove owns itself, and that's something that a lot of cemeteries, own themselves. And I'm like, this is blowing my mind, Louise. But she did say that, yes, there were several caretakers, but they were unofficial. And to her knowledge, there weren't any trustees appointed after the original 3. So, but that's the case with basically every cemetery in the county. That's everywhere from one burial in somebody's backyard up to any cemetery that's not owned by one of the cities. Because City of Cape only has the 3 cemeteries that they maintain, and they actually mow and then maintain the roadways through there and everything. But City of Jackson has the city cemetery and then Russell Heights Cemetery, and all they do is mow. They don't do any kind of upkeep to the to anything really in the cemeteries. But City of Cape only has Old Lorimer, New Lorimer, and Fairmount are the only 3 that the city handles. So there's an awful lot of acreage out there that is just not really being kept up. And African American cemeteries are particularly vulnerable because often they're either on prime farmland, the older ones, or they are prone to vandalism or other situations. So that was one of the things that was so unique about Shady Grove, is that it still has as much integrity as it does. So.
Cemetery Oakley, is it called Concord? Or was that the,
That's kind of an interesting history. It's didn't really start as an African American cemetery. It was a Baptist church cemetery for Apple Creek Baptist Church, which kind of fell out of existence around 1850. But it was called the Wilson Cemetery also. And the only people who are buried in it, and still buried in it, are African American now. And I think they're descendants of the slaves of some of the people that went to that Baptist church. But I have a great-great-great-grandmother buried in there, and I didn't even suspect she was buried there because she was Methodist. It kind of became a community cemetery. The name Concord Cemetery is kind of an unfortunate thing because there was a black community called Concord after the Civil War nearby, but that was not a community cemetery for that community. So it's more properly Apple Creek Baptist Church or Wilson Cemetery.
The vast majority of marked graves are like, there's probably a lot of unmarked graves, so the term...
Somebody cared for that cemetery with a brush hog for years. So any stone that leaned or fell got pulverized. I've got a picture of my 3rd great-grandmother's stone. It's in 3 pieces, and it's one of the better ones. A lot of Wittenbergs buried in there, very early Wittenbergs, who were a wealthy family, but, just goes to show you.
It's an interesting cemetery. They've got some of the old, Skull and Bones tombstones you see back east. And early, 18 teens, I think, dates on some of them.
Wow. That's really unusual. You don't usually see.
Yeah. I think there were a lot of marked graves in there at one time, but they just got pulverized.
Good job.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.